Sociology, like any other academic discipline, is theory-based. That is, in order to understand how societies work, we must go beyond the simplistic description of the phenomenon under investigation. Theoretical approaches derived from sociology dominate the field of medical sociology. This unit's lecture is meant to supplement the readings you did this week on the 5 theoretical perspectives on health and illness. I want to visit each one and draw out the key arguments so that we can perhaps begin to examine the similarities and differences between structural approaches to health and illness and social constructionist ones. Social structural approaches to exploring social reality include those empiricist sociologists who believe that an objective science of society is possible in much the same way as a physical science such as biology or physics. The empirical sociologist seeks to explain the norms of social life in terms of various identifiable linear causal influences. Social structural approaches would also include those sociologists who see human society as being shaped by an underlying material, social, and economic structure. These are structures that may not always be visible, but nevertheless are fundamental in explaining social and individual processes. In relation to illness and health, a social structuralist approach would draw upon quantitative data derived from numerous surveys, epidemiological studies, or comparative studies in order to point to the relative influence of societal structures in determining health outcomes for social groups. The perspectives of structural functionalism that you read for this week are that of Talcott Parsons and Karl Marx. The social structuralist perspective is also known as the functionalist perspective, which understands health as a prerequisite for the smooth functioning of a society. To be sick is to fail in terms of fulfilling one's role in society, thus illness is seen as an unmotivated defiance. The regulation of this sickness comes through the mechanisms of the sick role concept and the associated social control role of doctors in allowing an individual to take on a sick status. The functionalist perspective stresses the essential stability and cooperation within modern societies. Social events are explained by reference to the functions they perform in enabling continuity within a society. Thus, society itself is likened to a biological organism in that the whole is seen to be made up of interconnected and integrated parts. This integration is the result of a general consensus on core values and norms. Through the process of socialization, we learn these rules of society, which are then translated into roles. Thus, consensus is apparently achieved through the structuring of human behavior. Within medical sociology, this approach is essentially concerned with the theme of the sick role and the associated issue of illness behavior. Talcott Parsons, the leading figure within the sociological tradition, identified illness as a social phenomenon rather than as a purely physical condition. Whether or not he is regarded as the founding father, there is no denying the significance of Talcott Parsons' work for the subsequent development of medical sociology. It has been claimed that his concept of the sick role represents the most important theoretical contribution to medical sociology to date. His work is important for the subsequent development of medical sociology as a body of research recognized by other disciplines. Parsons is credited with offering a theorized sociological approach to understanding the medical treatment of illness as a social encounter. His sick role provides the most consistent and systematic approach to analyzing the behavior of sick people in Western society. Another reason, however, has to do with the significance of the concept as a first major theory in medical sociology. His analysis of sickness comes from a distinctively sociological point of view. Thus, it stimulated a considerable body of research in medical sociology. Parsons himself was influenced by the work of Emile Durkheim, who is also considered the father of sociology, and thus he was interested in the maintenance of value consensus and its translation into a stable social order. Parsons was committed to grand theory to unify a social understanding of society working under a single framework, which has come to be known as structural functionalism. He sought to analyze individual behavior in the context of large-scale social systems, and the link between the two was pattern variables, which structure any system of intersection. His interest in ill health was in terms of its influence on the wider functioning of society, high levels of illness and low levels of health being dysfunctional for society, preventing people from fulfilling their certain social roles. He argued that a certain level of good health in the population was important. It was a key social resource for the efficient functioning of a society, with medicine working to maintain this favorable level of health. The onset of illness was of particular interest to Parsons because it prevented the fulfillment of social roles, such as paid employment and parental duties, and he also conceptualized disease as motivated in some measure. The motivation to withdraw from social roles and to be cared for as a sick person in this model countered by the medical practitioner. Where a person's ill health requires a relinquishing of normal social roles, he or she is expected to visit a doctor, and this encounter involves a reciprocal set of obligations and privileges. The incapacitated person is offered a nice, turned, sick role where usual expectations are lifted, and he or she is permitted time to recover. The sick role offers the privilege of bed rest and the suspension of domestic and employment duties on condition that professional help is sought out and full cooperation is ceded to the physician. According to Parsons, the sick person has a specific role with both rights and responsibilities. To start with, he or she has not chosen to be sick and should not be treated as responsible for her condition. The sick person also has a right of being exempt from normal social roles. She is not required to fulfill the obligation of a well-to-do person and can avoid her normal responsibilities. However, this exemption is temporary and relative to the severity of the illness. The exemption also requires legitimation by a physician, that is, a physician must certify that the illness is genuine. The responsibility of the sick person is twofold: to try to get well and to seek technically competent help from a physician. If the sick person stays ill longer than is appropriate, he or she may be stigmatized. Parsons argues that since the sick are unable to fulfill their normal roles in society, their sickness does weaken society. Therefore, it is sometimes necessary for various forms of social control to bring the behavior of a sick person back in line with normal expectations. In this model, doctors serve as gatekeepers, deciding who is sick and who is healthy, a relationship in which the doctor has all the power. But is it appropriate to allow doctors so much power over deciding who is sick? And what about people who are sick but are unwilling to leave their positions for any number of reasons, for example, financial needs, social, personal obligations? What is important about the Parsons model is that he recognized the doctor-patient relationship as a social system, which is built upon societal norms, structures, and processes, which are to some extent beyond individuals and whose effect was social cohesion. There are some key criticisms of the Parsons model that are mentioned in the reading, which I will not revisit here. However, I will mention a key one, that being that Parsons' idealized sick role presumes a certain universality. Parsons was not interested in illness as a bodily state, but focused rather on the regulation of social roles involved. And there's an implicit assumption that with the onset of symptoms, people will adopt a passive compliant role as patient. A minority of people who experience symptoms seek consultation with a doctor, with the majority self-medicating or consulting with others, or perhaps taking no action at all and waiting for the problem to resolve itself. The Parsons model is conceived of as working consensually, with patients complying willingly with their physician's order and submitting to the regimens of care. Conflict theorists, on the other hand, saw this as an inappropriate characterization because they argued that the doctor-patient relationship can be highly conflictual, whereas structural functionalism views social hierarchy as a necessary, functional feature of a complex society. Conflict theorists view competition between groups for scarce resources as their characteristic nature of social relationships. And this is the perspective that I want to turn to next. The Marxist perspective of health and illness forms part of what is known as the conflict perspective, which suggests that the issues with the healthcare system, as most other social problems, are rooted in capitalist society. According to conflict theorists, capitalism and the pursuit of profit led to the commodification of health, the changing but something not generally thought of as a commodity into something that could be bought and sold in the marketplace. In this view, people with money and power, hence the dominant group, are the ones who make decisions about how the healthcare system is run. This in turn creates significant health disparities between dominant and subordinate groups. Alongside the health disparities created by class inequalities, there are also a number of other disparities created by racism, sexism, ageism, and heterosexism. When health is a commodity, the poor are more likely to experience illness caused by poor diet, to live and work in unhealthy environments, and are less likely to challenge the system. In the United States, a disproportionate number of racial minorities also have less economic power, so they bear a great deal of the burden of poor health. It is not only the poor, however, who suffer from the conflict between dominant and subordinate groups. For many years now, for example, same-sex couples have also been denied spousal benefits either in the form of health insurance or medical responsibility. Further adding to the issue, doctors hold a disproportionate amount of power in the doctor-patient relationship, which provides them with extensive social and economic benefits. Marx's ideas were a critical commentary, really, on the expansion of industrial capitalism and how these raw materials were transformed into the commodities, something that was occurring as he studied in northern European cities back in the 19th century. Manchester, the city where his friend Engels moved to work in his father's company, like any other British industrial centers at that time, was being transformed into a city with a huge population and little sanitary infrastructure. The working class lived in horrible conditions, which Engels noted in his book, and lived in such great contrast to the wealthy industrialists. Marx referred to Engels' work to demonstrate the ways in which capitalism ruins workers' health in the pursuit of profit. Marx divided the population according to its position within the system of production. Under this scheme, the majority of the population was working class and was exploited by the small minority who owned the land and factories. A key assertion of the Marxist perspective is that material production is the most fundamental of all human activities, from the production of the most basic of human necessities such as food, shelter, and clothing in a subsistence economy to the mass production of commodities in modern capitalist societies. Whether this production takes place within a modern or subsistence economy, it involves some sort of organization and the use of appropriate tools. This is termed in Marxism forces of production. Production of any type was recognized by Marx also as being involved in social relations. In modern capitalist societies, these relations of production lead to a development of a division of labor that reflects the existence of these different social classes. For Marx, it is these forces and the relations of production together that constitute the economic base or infrastructure of a society. The superstructure of a society, the political, legal, education, and health system, are also shaped and determined to a large extent by this economic base. The orientation of this approach, as applied within medical sociology, is towards the social origins of disease. Health outcomes for the population are seen as being influenced by the operation of the capitalist economic system at two levels. First, at the level of production process itself, health is affected either directly in terms of industrial diseases and injuries, stress-related ill health, or indirectly through the wider effects of the process of commodity production within modern societies. The production process produces environmental pollution, while the process of consuming the commodities themselves have long-term health consequences, such as, for example, eating processed food, chemical additives, car accidents, and so on. Second, health is also influenced at the level of distribution. Income and wealth are major determinants of people's standard of living, where they live, their access to educational opportunities, their access to healthcare, their diet, and recreational opportunities. All of these factors are significant in the social patterning of health. That a person's position within the social hierarchy is defined by the labor market position and property relations and how this affects their life chances has been a central sociological insight. The observation that one's experience of illness and chances of premature death are related to one's position in the socioeconomic hierarchy is central to the study of health inequalities. The persistence of inequalities in mortality and morbidity, even as life expectancy in wealthy nations has risen, suggests that competition for scarce resources is a better model of human society than the value consensus cooperation imagined by the structural functionalists. And here, really, we could also see the differences between Parsonian functionalism and Marxist theory. Capitalist economic development has obviously changed dramatically from Marx's day, and it seems indisputable that social class alone is no longer an adequate measure to understand the social divisions in a globalized world of unregulated capitalism. Both the Parsonian functionalism and Marxist theory form the social structural perspective in the interpretation of illness and health. Yet, while the functional perspective looks at health and illness and how it fits into a full functioning society, the conflict perspective is concerned with how health and illness fit into the oppositional forces in society. In the second part of the lecture, we will turn to the interpretive approaches to health and illness.